Hello, I'm Dr. Louis Meyers, and welcome to Meet the Author. I'm your host of this show where we talk to authors about the books they've read. I have two wonderful authors on with us on Zoom from their home in Memphis, Tennessee today, Miss Nancy Levine and her daughter Rachel. And I'm going to introduce each of them and do a short blurb of the book and then put the book here so that you can see this book, which came out just this year, and I can highly, highly recommend it. Miss Nancy Levine is a former pediatric neurology nurse at the University of Vermont Medical Center. She received her MFA, Master's in Fine Arts, in writing from Vermont College of Fine Arts. Her work has appeared in Mothers and Daughters, a poetry collection, and The Sun magazine, among others. She lives with her husband and their Labradoodle in Shelburne, Vermont. Rachel Levine-Spates received her Master's in Education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and is the Director of Student Wellbeing and Social Emotional Learning at St. George's Independent School in Germantown, Tennessee. She lives with her family there in Memphis. So I'm going to read a short blurb in the book, and we're going to talk about this in some detail. Light is the topic of the book, a mother and daughter memoir of anorexia. Light is a story of depression and obsessive-compulsive disorder, family history and stigma, and Rachel's battle with life-threatening anorexia. Once called the sickest of the sick, Rachel fought to recover with her mother and family by her side. Narrated by Nancy, with excerpts and journal entries from Rachel before, during, and after treatment, this memoir explores how the deadly inner voice of an eating disorder is heard, treated, and finally silenced. Blending tough scenes with humorous ones, this unique and brave book celebrates hope and a lasting recovery. So with that, I want to welcome you both and thank you for being here. I know you've talked to some other groups, but this book recently came out. What kind of response are you getting from people?
More people related to it than I thought. Because although it's about anorexia, it's also about moving in and helping a young adult with a huge health crisis. Just as we thought, life was good, everything was done, our kids were raised, we were all hit with the biggest challenge of our parenting. And that's what I think so many people have related to. Hardly any family can say, oh, we never had a rough time.
Mm-hmm. I think similarly for me, just folks connecting whether they've experienced an eating disorder or they've experienced anxiety or OCD or depression or another mental health issue or even another health issue. I think folks just being able to make a connection to another's story has been a really powerful component. And one of the neatest moments so far, we were vacationing in October and we were in Martha's Vineyard and we were in a bookstore and we were looking for the book and they didn't have it, but a gal heard me ask the clerk about the book and she followed me out of the store and she said, can you tell me about this book? And I said, of course. And I told her about the book, and they live in London and their daughter is an adult as well and struggling with a very severe eating disorder. So she said she was going to order it right away. She just needed a story where she could see that there was a possibility to be hopeful and there was a possibility that her daughter may recover. So cool moments like that for sure have been, I think, the highlight in my experience.
Yeah, and we've had many of them. It's been surprising.
The book is written really for the general public. This is not a scientific book, although you do introduce a number of current concepts in the treatment of eating disorder, a number of options, but it's really about your own personal experience, and I think that's what can help the general people in the general public relate to this book. I do want to ask you, we're here in Vermont. This is an extraordinarily open, vulnerable, honest book about Rachel, about yourself, Nancy Levine, and about your husband, Mark Levine. And I want to add a disclaimer. The Levines have been friends of mine, Nancy and Mark, for many years. So I'm calling you by your first name. Normally I would call authors by their last name, but I just can't call you by your last name. But your husband, Mark Levine, is an absolutely superb physician. He was one of the deans at the medical school for many years, and for 8 years he was the Commissioner of Health for Vermont, one of the most trusted and recognized and respected people in the state. And in this book, you've been very honest about his struggles as well, which became sort of incorporated in Rachel's struggles to some extent, and then his courage in entering into family therapy and confronting his own anxieties, which in turn, it sounds like were rather integral to Rachel's recovery. I'm just interested, Nancy, in any discussion you might have had with your husband about, given that he's such a public figure, about writing a book that's so vulnerable.
When Mark became health commissioner, I decided not to publish the book. I felt it was too out there, too public, and I didn't want to put anything out there that he might not be comfortable with. So I said, I'm not publishing it. And Mark said, that's not going to work. You're going to publish the book. And then the pandemic came along, and I held off then because he was so very busy. And once he was getting closer to retiring, he said, this is the time, you have to publish it. And what he said, I think, was important. He goes, I'm not embarrassed about one word of this story. Because who has a perfect life?
Right.
And eating disorders are a public health issue. And during the pandemic, of course, the numbers of eating disorders just spiraled. Mm-hmm. And he said, this is a public health issue. And he said, I wasn't doing anything wrong on purpose. You weren't doing anything wrong on purpose, but we're human. We made mistakes and we dug our way out. And I'm proud of our story. Well, he had read every word I'd written. He was okay with it. Where I was a little anxious.
Well, and can I add, you mentioned the idea of being embarrassed, and he was not embarrassed. And I think that's such an important part of this conversation, because shame is something that causes folks to struggle so tremendously. And you always hear about the idea of shame living in the darkness. And the whole idea of this story is light. And the whole idea of this story is wellness. And the whole idea of the story is being honest and confronting things that are hard. And just the duality of light and dark. And I think shame is an important component. So I'm grateful that that was his thinking too, because I think it's very easy for any of us that have struggled or do struggle to get really lost in the shame, and it makes it so hard to get well.
Super important point, and I appreciate you sharing that. Well, Rachel, I'm gonna let you tell your story, just sort of the highlights or the beginnings of your story. You grew up here in Vermont. You were a good student, and take it from there.
Sure. Vermont is, I just love Vermont. Let me start there. What a great place to grow up. Yeah, no, I'm so grateful that I have had the ability to grow up there, and we get back there often, which is awesome. So I went to University of Vermont, another great place, and around my junior year, I studied abroad in Australia, began exercising really compulsively, began losing weight, and received a lot of positive feedback from the community about that, because we definitely are fat phobic and thick centric, and we love smaller bodies in this world as it currently exists. So people were thrilled to see my, body become smaller and leaner and more muscular, and I definitely absorbed that because it's, in my early 20s, that sort of feedback felt great. And I think there's so much of an addiction component to eating disorders. So as soon as I began restricting and exercising more, it was like a hamster on a wheel, and it became nearly impossible to make any changes that would be more productive to allow me to stop losing weight. By the time I was a senior in high school and I moved back to the US and came back to UVM, it was completely out of control at that point. I was losing lots of weight and completely sort of in the eating disorder spiral of restricting food, never feeling like enough, losing weight, it never feeling like enough, but certainly not able to confront that I had an eating disorder. I very much believed I was just living a healthier life than most, and I was extremely successful academically during that period of time, more successful than I'd ever been academically. So I felt like everything's great. I got accepted to AmeriCorps out in California when I graduated, moved to California, and things continued to just, go down really quickly, to the point that then my parents recognized, though you're saying you're fine, that's not the case. Everything indicates that you're not. Got in some outpatient therapy in California, which was a nice start, but the level of disease that I was experiencing at that time, there was no way I could do outpatient care to see any improvement. So around May of that year, I'd moved out in August. Around May, we had an intervention after I had a health episode. I was teaching first grade in California through AmeriCorps, and I had a health episode in the classroom, and that definitely scared me to the point that I felt like I couldn't survive well having this eating disorder. Even though I was not ready to be recovered, I just knew that things had gotten bad. Entered residential treatment towards the end of May, and that was out in Nevada at the Center for Hope. And a long, nearly year there of really intensive therapy. The biggest therapy for an anorexic is nutrition, so that was the most essential thing for my body so that my brain could begin to even try to function typically. And I think for anorexic folks, that's a challenging part of the disorder. You can do the Prozac, which I did. You can do the therapy, which I did. You can do all the things which you need to do, but until you get to a more typical restored body weight, your brain just cannot function typically, and you can't get to the place of wellness. So getting to a restored body weight was really essential.
And I think part of getting to that restored body weight that was unusual is she developed what's called a hypermetabolic syndrome, which meant that before she could begin to restore 1 pound, she had to be slowly worked up to 5,500 calories a day.
More some days, many days more.
Which is an unusual amount of calories for anybody who's not an Olympic athlete.
Yeah, they told me it was largely similar to like someone who's, training to be in the NFL or the level of calories. For someone who's anorexic, you can imagine that feels not like something very fun.
Let me just pause for a minute, go back a little ways. So you were indeed a really good student. Your dad's a prominent physician, your mom's in medicine as well. You were thinking about going to medical school.
Yes.
Some of the pre-med courses sort of got in the way of that. You found a special interest in working with autistic children, I think, when you were younger, and that's continued as you work with young children. But you were a good student. You were athletic. You were focused. There are a lot of young people like that, and maybe even a little OCD at that point, but there are a lot of young people like that who don't tip into severe disease as you did. When you look back, what do you think led you down that road, whereas other people might just sort of continue in their little OCD way?
One thing I'm really curious about, and maybe this is something that you've researched in your days, but there's a gene that is linked to anorexia. That I very much am curious, especially as a mother now, I'm curious if that had any interplay. We can trace back anorexia at least 3 generations on my dad's side.
Interesting.
Positively. So myself, my dad, his mother, and then we have some records that indicate through a family member that does a lot of family history work that his grandmother too may have had food-related struggles. So I think that there is potentially the genetic portion, which I think we can't not mention. And then I think there's also all the environmental. So we talked a lot, the book was very honest about the fact that my environment definitely was ripe for a person who already had the genetic predisposition to develop an eating disorder based on the behaviors that were mentioned in the book with my dad, with being very sort of obsessive about healthy eating because he's been traumatized as a physician and he's seen so many terrible things that have happened as an impact of folks maybe not being able to care for their bodies the way that he wants to. And certainly my mom fell victim to the 90s sort of hype about fad dieting and slim fast and all these different things, because women are constantly, and men too, are told that their body is not whatever enough.
Those fad diets are still with us, by the way.
100%. I have to think they started in the 90s though. All these books came out and this slim fast rage, and then they have only amplified. And Now we have a million other things, and we could talk about GLP-1s all day and how those have become tricky for the eating disorder space. But I think it was environment. I think it was genetics. I think I also had some of my own, you could call them traumas, you could call them grief, you could call them a lot of things, but hard times, I think, is the safe word. I had hard times just like everybody does. And I think with all of the sort of loaded chambers, when you added tricky hard times and death and loss, when you added those into the matrix, I think it was just, at that point, something that we were on the train and it was moving and there was no way to stop it.
There were a series of deaths that really impacted.
Yeah.
Right. And though, like Dr. Meyers said, there are so many parts of the story that could be any kid that doesn't develop an eating disorder. Mm-hmm. So I do think the other components definitely played a big role.
What I thought I would do also is, there are so many beautiful phrases, Nancy, and so many paragraphs, so writerly in this book, which is, part of your background as a writer. But I thought I pulled out a few quotes, and I thought I would just throw them out there and let each or both of you reflect on those. Number one, a quote, "A young woman with leukemia develops pallor, bruises, abnormal blood counts, and often bone pain. One developing anorexia is, for a while, at the very top of her game, and that inner voice of terrible discipline sounds like the best coach in town."
Yeah.
And that's what we just spoke about, right? That's academically, I'd never been more successful, and I was never necessarily a poor student, but I was never like a 4.0 student, and I was a 4.0 student in my anorexia. Yeah. And that felt really great coming from a high achieving, and if I can for a moment, name the fact that often in Jewish families, there is sort of an importance on academia. I think that's a fair statement as a Jewish person to say. And that was certainly true in my family. So I felt like, oh my gosh, I can make my family so proud. In fairness, I was never worried about my mom with my grades. I did not feel like I needed to impress her ever academically. But I certainly felt that from other family members. So it felt great. My dad is so smart and so high achieving and so successful. And to be able to be like, Dad, I got a 4.0. I mean, he ultimately at this point in time, that's not what he cares about. But in the moment when I was 20, that felt really important. So I do think you feel that on top of your game sort of vibe, and then you're going, how could this be wrong, even though on some level that it's.
There was a book that came out, I'm sorry, Nancy, go ahead.
What Mark has often talked about are the eating disorders in medical students and residents. Because, there's so much stress with the schedule, with the work, the desire to do everything correctly, to be perfect. There's also a higher incidence of eating disorders in the Jewish population. All the same kind of reasons. And what Mark got diagnosed with was something he hadn't really heard about, and it was early in the naming of this, but a condition called orthorexia. And that's what we talk about in the book. And people who are orthorexic will tell you they're living the healthiest lifestyle possible. They will be exercising every day, maybe 1 to 2 hours. Food will be restricted but healthy. You'll see a lot of salads. And there's an obsession about it that can stay that way. Or in Rachel's case, go one step further and go right into an anorexic type episode.
Just an example of your humor. At one point, your husband, Mark, looks at a muffin like it was a missile, a chocolate muffin. There was a book that came out I think it was the late 1970s or early 80s, called The Best Little Girl in the World. And it was about anorexia. It was one of the early books about anorexia nervosa. And sort of gets back to this, that it sounds like many of the women and men with anorexia tend to be trying to be perfect. They're not the kids that are messing up in class and cut-ups and rebellious, et cetera, openly rebellious at least, that it is, they're good kids.
And if you want to get work done, you go to someone with anorexia, because those people can work, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Yeah,
Motivating.
just taken,
Very motivated to complete a task. And
Taken
when
to
I
an
first
extreme.
visited Rachel in the residential center, I met all the women who were there and noted to a person, they were all in the helping professions. Psychiatrist, art therapist, a person who worked with kids groups. There was not one MBA in the place.
I want to just add, there was a little, somewhat disturbing portion where one of your early therapists was still clearly struggling with her eating disorder. And, you know, we see that occasion sometimes in the substance abuse field where people who are counselors are still having their own struggles. And that was concerning to you, Nancy, because you recognize this woman was, if she was going to help Rachel, it was made more difficult by the fact that she really hadn't quite gotten control of her own eating disorder. Do you find that in that field sometimes?
That was the only time I was aware of it, was with this one particular individual. And what I noticed is Rachel was actually giving her therapy instead. And that's when I knew we had to move her to a different center.
Yeah.
And in the residential center Rachel was in, I was in awe of the quality of the practitioners.
Yeah. No, that comes across in the book. I'm going to read another quote now. And Rachel, I think this is from you, your portion of the book. Quote, everyone thinks anorexia is about you having control or about desiring the perfect body. Maybe it's that way in the beginning, but after a while, you're the one being controlled, and you don't even see your body the way it really is. All you know is that you absolutely can't stop what you're doing. You feel like if you did, you'd have nothing, you'd be nothing. Can you talk about that a little bit, that feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the importance of the beginning of the way that this comes to life is important, because like I named, in Australia, people were very complimentary in the initial stages of my eating disorder, and it really felt like I was in charge of this new life and creating this, you know, this perfection, sort of perfect image that I could really handle. And then very quickly it changes, and you no longer really can operate in the way that I would say I operate my life today, where I wake up, I'm a working parent, I have a life, so I can't always be this way. But let's say it's a Saturday morning, I can wake up and I can decide, what do I feel like doing today? And then I can do that, right? That's the way my life operates today. In the eating disorder, everything is scripted and planned and prescribed, and there's no flexibility. And it's all very, at least for me, because of the OCD component, extremely ritualized, right? So there's all of these, there's an order of operations for everything. And you quickly discover that this allows you to feel okay. This is, right, the coping mechanism. The eating disorder is not the primary diagnosis. It's allowing me to cope with the other things that I've not managed. And you know that if you don't do any of the things you're supposed to do, you're going to feel terrible. And that's a really out of control feeling when you know that you have no real say in what we would call in the eating disorder world your wise mind, which is that side of you that knows what's right. You know that that side of you is completely incapacitated. And that's an extremely powerless feeling. And that's an extremely painful feeling. And it's one that you know is there, but you feel that you can do nothing about. Much like you hear folks with addiction naming sort of the inability to do the thing which they know will be the thing that allows them to be okay. My psychiatrist, Wendy Oliver Pyatt, who's a dear friend and someone I respect so immensely, she always says, choose the loving behavior. And that's something that now I can choose the loving behavior 99.9% of the time, other than if my family needs dictate that I can't. But then I could choose the loving behavior never. And you could find sort of incrementally as you were becoming more well, when you were actually able to access that adage and actually follow it.
I think there is, you like compare it to an addiction, and yeah, when you read the book, you do. I was thinking, this sounds like someone who has an addiction to alcohol, drugs, or other things, that it out of their control.
Absolutely.
Nancy, for the parents, this is you write about this rather poignantly, because parents are sort of approached in a different way by people in the community than if their daughter or son had a more obvious disease like cancer, for example. You write, quote, But when your daughter has anorexia, an illness both physical and psychological, you feel isolated and culpable. There aren't any casseroles being brought by neighbors. When you meet the gaze of someone asking how your daughter is, you think you see criticism in their eyes," unquote. Can you talk about that feeling and that impression?
I certainly felt that, and I really identified with so many of the parents of kids I took care of in the pediatric neurology department. Because many of the kids I had worked with had behavioral issues that always came out in public, and people looked at the parents like, "Oh, your fault." And I think with mental health issues, we're always more quick to blame than we are with purely physical issues.
And it is any severe illness of a child puts a stress on a marriage. And sometimes it breaks marriages apart, sometimes it makes them stronger. You write, and I quote, Nancy writes, talking about you and your husband, "We clung together at night, such closeness, a respite exceeding anything we'd experienced before. As we were getting the idea that times would worsen before they'd improve, we knew we'd get through them together," unquote. Was that a turning point, or one of the turning points for you and your husband?
Well, I think what I felt was there was nobody who understood how I felt more than Mark did. And there was no one who understood him more than me. And we'd always had a good marriage, but this took us to a different level. That we were in it together. And what we recognized is we were far from the perfect family, but we were probably perfect for each other.
Yeah. Well, you're two great people, and I'm glad that you were able to turn to each other. One of the other stresses was financial, and despite the fact that you had a good job, and obviously your husband's been a physician for many years, this was a tremendous strain on your finances. You refinanced the house, you took out loans. Obviously, there are a lot of parents who can't do that when their child is ill with anorexia or other diseases. But even if you do have the money, it was a real stress, particularly as you were both getting older and nearing the sort of retirement ages. How did you deal with that?
It sounds like it should be a stress, but it wasn't. We recognized we were coming from a place of privilege, that we had the ability to borrow money and we had the ability to pay it back. And we could work for a long time, and most people did not have that advantage. And we knew that Rachel would get well, and it was like, this is what we're doing now.
Yeah.
And we did.
There were some very touching other moments. You went to the credit union to take out another large loan, and the credit union manager said, just get her well. Borrow as much as you need, which was special. And then your head nurse at on the unit where you were working kind of shocked you, I think, because she told you that she was bulimic. And I'll quote your book. Terry, that's her name, Terry's admission stunned me, for I'd never guessed her history. Now I see Terry as the face of millions with eating disorders, of those who struggle daily with an illness which is controlling them, but due to their weights, their symptoms go unseen, unquote. I guess, I don't know if she's still at the university. I assume that she gave you permission to use her name and story.
She gave permission. She said, you don't have to change my name, but the publisher wanted the name changed. But this person, one of the best nurses I've ever worked with in my life, just extraordinary with parents, with kids, with hospital staff, a huge knowledge base. You just would not find a better nurse. And when she sat down and told me this, and she's like, just get her better, because tonight I'm going to go home and throw up. It just really hit me.
Yeah.
Well, it's important to name, though, that, the majority of folks with severe eating disorders are at a typical body weight.
Right.
So they encounter somebody that you look at them and you make a judgment that they're in a typical weight, and they look healthy to you and it looks like they're fine, and then you run their labs and their electrolytes are so off that they're about to have a cardiac arrest, right?
Yeah.
Like this is how it can show up very often, with anorexics included. There's a lot of anorexic folk who are extremely ill at a typical body weight.
Yeah.
Insurance is a real challenge for them because insurance barely wants to support folks at a very atypical body weight who are extremely underweight. And if they see that you're at a typical body weight, much harder to get insured if you need to go to treatment. As a motivator for the anorexia, which is telling you to get sicker anyway.
As we said at the top, and as you point out, you had a severe form of this disorder, and you really could have died, and you were still resisting treatment, the inpatient treatment. And at that point, Nancy goes nuclear. She if she was a poker player, she's putting all the chips on the table, and she says, and I quote, she's talking to you at that point, quote, you, Rachel, can also choose not to do any of these treatment options, but if so, I'm calling my lawyer and he will contact a judge and get a court order to have you immediately committed to a psychiatric unit, unquote. Now, it's possible that may or may not have happened, but it was a turning point. It was a turning point, a critical turning point. How did you feel when she said that, Rachel?
I lived in the state of California at the time, and I was very familiar with the 5150 sort of like legal threshold that if you're mentally incapacitated, you're going to be put in a psychiatric unit. And I also knew that because of my body weight, I would immediately be on a feeding tube, which I was terrified of. Not even because of restoring body weight, but just growing up in a medical household, I understand the process of how you receive a feeding tube.
Yes.
And it sounds archaic and painful and awful and traumatizing. And I didn't want that really badly. And I also, to be very real, like I knew that my mom was not bullshitting me. Like she was going to do this if she had to. What I later learned is she did not actually have the lawyer's number on speed dial, but I also don't doubt for a single second that she would have done it. I'm positive she would have done it. She just would have had to find the lawyer's number.
Well, like I say, she bluffs well. She bluffs well.
Yeah, she bluffs well, but she would have done it. I have absolutely, and now I'm a mom and I would do it too. And anyone who's a parent or anyone who loves another person and caregives, they would do it too. So I don't doubt it would have happened. I remember where we were. A lot of my memory is dodgy because my brain was so malnourished, but I remember physically exactly where we were sitting when she said it when I lived in California.
Was there a feeling of relief? Was there a feeling of relief for you when she said that? Along with the
not
terror.
really. I wish that was the case. It was more a feeling of like, I imagine if you're, this is an odd way to say it, but if you've just committed a crime and you're on the run and you've like been really successful, like Bonnie and Clyde, you've made it away, you've evaded a million times, and then finally the police stop you and you're like, they got me. It wasn't relief though. It was more just like, I'm backed against this wall and now there's no option. But maybe subconsciously, maybe there was something that said, you're out of control and you know you're out of control and this is a ticket to have.
Yeah. Well, just to finish that quote, and it was somewhat humorously, your mom writes in the book, someday your dad and I will be old farts. And if we're dangerous, you can take our car keys. And if we're not safe living alone, you can send us to a nursing home. You'll be in charge of us when we aren't safe. But right now, you're not safe. That was.
I am named as the person that gets to make decisions for them.
Well, they're doing okay right now. Let's give them another couple of years. All right, they're doing okay.
They're doing great. I don't need to do any of that stuff. They're making great choices.
I think one thing that's hard for parents is, and this is what people have told me, is how far do you step in when your child who is off the rails is a legal adult?
Yeah. Yes. And clearly that's people, again, with other addictions. That's parents who are struggling with that have to ask that question every day. There's also you went to a restaurant, and you were encouraged by the therapist to have everyone eat, things that they might not otherwise eat, including your dad. And your father says, protests. He says, Rachel's the one with the eating disorder, he said, with the conviction of an innocent man being wrongfully accused. He said, there's no reason to raise my cholesterol so that I can have fries along with her. Nancy hisses, just do it. But then your father, more seriously says, he said, Rachel, I'll do whatever it takes to get you better again. And Nancy writes, I knew Mark would carry out his promise. He's a man who honors his word. True?
Yeah, and I had so much respect for how Mark was there. The therapist said to my son and I, you seem to be nice people. You don't seem to have an issue with this. Call us if you need the support. But we really need to work with Mark. And what I was told later is parents who are physicians and get called on the carpet like that tend to deny and back away. They said it was very rare for a physician father to take part in the treatment and do what was asked. And so I think I had more respect for Mark for that period than ever in his whole career, because we knew he could handle everything professional, and he does. But he was given a huge challenge to question the way he thought about nutrition and food. And he did what was asked of him, even though he was sure it was going to give him a heart attack.
And he was the only family member that had to do therapy. It was he and I every week. My mom said she and my brother were excused. So, the target, so to speak, was put on him, and he met the occasion, and he showed up every week, and he allowed some of his beliefs to be challenged by very strong, powerful women who were incredible clinicians who called him out on everything. And he allowed it, and he listened, and he would have grace and understanding for their expertise, knowing that his expertise was different than theirs.
Well, physicians do tend to not make the best of patients, but in this case, he stepped up for sure. Now, another quote from Nancy's book, slowly Rachel learned the art of being gentle with herself. Rachel had goodness and kindness for all, but during her illness, a punishing discipline took over. In its wake was left a woman, a semblance of pleasure. Rachel needed to relearn that a full stomach felt good, that a massage felt comforting, and most importantly, she learned that she deserved a good life and a mindful life. I guess this is the life lesson. Yeah. Is that something that you pass on in your daily life with others? Are you able to do that?
Yes. So my work is largely, the early childhood side of things. So that would be our 3-year-olds through 8-year-olds. And through my professional role, I'm spending lots of time leading groups. I'm spending lots of time doing social emotional learning lessons, learning alongside children, like what feels good to us. Can we find joy, and how can we manage sadness? Because both will be a part of life. Getting to do that with students every day, getting to do that with my family. I have a bonus daughter who's 22, who has a year left of nursing school, and watching her as she discovers amid a stressful life how I can find balance and how I can find joy and how I can be gentle even when I have exams. And then my husband and I have a 6-year-old, and walking alongside her as she discovers the things that bring her joy and the things that don't. It's really awesome and beautiful, and it feels really full circle. I feel joyful when I get to be in those moments, and when I get to practice self-care, and where I get to be gentle. I'm sometimes probably too gentle. I joke with my therapist, like I could probably afford to be more sort of, not restrictive, but be more forceful with myself. I should do this, I should do that. But the minute in my head I hear should, I just don't do it. I'm very gentle with myself at this point, and that's important to me. And sometimes, like I said, I have to actually think about balancing, because sometimes there are things we just need to do even if we don't want to. But I definitely lean on gentle, which feels really healthy, and it feels like a reward almost after everything my body and my mind have been through together.
Well, it's very lovely, and I'll add one final quote. Recovery is a choice. This is your writing, Rachel. Recovery is a choice every single day. whether you're on day 1 or day 2000. You must choose recovery to experience recovery. It doesn't happen by accident. Now, 15 years later, exercise is no longer a punishment, but instead a chance to find freedom in movement and the positive gratitude for all that my body endured. Movement is now a celebration of my body's incredible resilience. Teaching is simultaneously exhausting and restorative. It demands that I take great care of my own self, and I must practice what I preach. Couple of questions. You mentioned earlier the GLP-1 medications that are now more, available to people. And again, I know that neither of you are professional experts in this, but I've heard from some people that who may have struggled with their eating in the past that it actually helped quiet the noise in their head. On the other hand, when you were in the throes of anorexia and trying to control your hunger, if you had gotten somehow your hand on these GLP-1s, would that have made things worse or better, do you think?
And what I'll speak to non-clinically, of course, because I don't have that expertise, but what I'll speak to just in my knowledge of working informally with folks and still trying to find myself in the eating disorder space as a support person, we're seeing a lot of anorexic folks that are microdosing GLP-1s, so they're using a really small dose, but they're using a small dose in order to sort of amplify the work of anorexia, so they're hopeful to lose more weight than maybe they would have, and also certainly quieting the food noise is major. And I know that's really important for some folks who are struggling with other things, but for anorexics, that's obviously not a great setup. I think that the microdosing in particular of people that are at a typical or below typical body weight is concerning. And then I think for anyone that is even considering a GLP-1, I think it's really important to take an eating disorder screener. And these screeners you can find online. I wish I remember the name of the screening tool right now, but I can't locate it in my brain. Certainly if you do some eating disorder research, Googling wise, it'll pop up. You can take an eating disorder screener, and if you are scoring positively in any way, then I would hope that a physician or an NP or your prescriber would caution you that GLP-1 is probably not a smart choice. And again, that is my non-professional, non-clinical, just personal advice. I think they can be really a slippery slope for folks with eating disorders in particular.
In general, when you went, of course, you had gotten to the point where your disorder was so severe that, Nancy, you went to trying to find therapists, and a number of therapists said, no, I can't handle someone with that severe disorder, knowing that you were on death's door practically. But if families are concerned about their children, or even about themselves, that they may be approaching an eating disorder or already in an eating disorder, what's the best first step?
I suggest calling the eating disorder hotline. It's a 24/7 hotline staffed by licensed therapists.
Is that a national hotline?
It is, and the phone number is 1-866-662-1235.
Wait, say that again, once again.
1-866-662-1235.
Good, thank you.
In terms of numbers, nearly 1 person out of 10 in the United States will have an eating disorder in their lifetime. And 1 person in this country dies every 52 minutes from complications related to an eating disorder. And eating disorders cover many different types of eating disorders. People always think about, well, anorexia and bulimia, but there's several other ones that can be just as lethal. 1 in 10 in the country, that's pretty high.
Yeah, those are big numbers.
Well, if folks are concerned, certainly reaching out to that hotline. The National Eating Disorders Association, NEDA, is kind of the gold standard in terms of a starting place as well. It's important to find a certified eating disorder specialist if you're seeking therapy. So that's someone with that CEDS credential, the certified eating disorder specialist. Just this is kind of their world. And for folks that need a physician as well, there are physicians even now that are going well above and beyond what they might receive in their medical training to have some extra eating disorder knowledge. And getting a physician like that can be really supportive too, because it impacts every major system in your body if you have an eating disorder.
Yeah, and I can say of course, it's been many years since I was in medical school and residency training, but we did not get a lot of training on eating disorders. Maybe it's changed in the years since, but I'm not sure. Given all that has to be covered in those short years, I'm not sure that it does get the attention it needs.
Yeah, I went to a training actually like 2 weeks ago here in Memphis, and it was put on by Acute, which was a eating disorder in Denver. And they shared that typically residents right now are receiving 30 to 90 minutes of specific eating disorder training for their entire medical training. So that's a challenge, certainly. And certainly they're hearing about all the other things, and they're able to recognize when electrolytes are off, and they're able to be mindful of cardiac implications and all of these other things. But that specific training on average is extremely minimal. So finding a specialist can be crucial.
What about insurance coverage? I mean, back in the day, I remember when I worked in a psychiatric facility, Blue Cross would cover 364 days a year of inpatient coverage. Now they might cover 5 or something. I'm just pulling that out of my hat. But, clearly inpatient coverage must be limited at this point.
Under 90 days often is what folks will get, which is typically not long enough. Mom, what were you about to say?
So Rachel, through her insurance carrier, was allowed $50,000 for inpatient. And they did not want to pay. They kept saying the codes were in error, and they wouldn't give us that $50,000, even though we had jumped through all the hoops. And finally, and Mark was being ever so polite and professional with them. And I said, I'm over being polite and professional. And I asked to speak with the manager of this insurance company. And when I spoke with her, this was really, really bad. I asked her if he was a Christian. And she said, well, yes, I am. What does that have to do with it? And I said, well, if you were a Christian, you would make sure this error was righted immediately. Yeah.
Yeah,
and I said,
I'm not sure how far that got you, but it was.
And furthermore, I said,
try.
And if you can't live up to your belief, I'm sticking Bernie Sanders on you tomorrow. And she goes, not to worry, I'm cutting you the check this afternoon.
Well, and people know that $50,000, that covers 50 days in treatment. Treatment 20 years ago was about $1,000 a day. So 50 days that's not even 2 months. So that's a challenge for sure. And I'm glad my mom named the privilege of being able to get high quality care, because it really is a privilege, unfortunately, in the United States. It's not the rule.
Well, we're going to be coming to the end in a minute, but I do want to recommend again this book. It's not a long book, but every page has something important to learn. And as I wrote, it's a beautifully written book. Nancy has experience as a writer and a real gift to write. And so there's even some humor in the midst of the darkness, which always helps. But as a family, you sounds like you have broken the chain. And we hope that this book and the hotline and advice you've given and thoughts you've shared will help break the chain for other families. So I want to thank Nancy Levine and Rachel Levine-Spates for being with me today from Memphis, and their husband and Nancy's husband Mark, my good friend, for being part of all of this, of course.
To thank you for taking the time to pull out quotes from the book. We've had a few podcasts done, and this is the first time this has happened.
Well, it's and there's so many more. That's why I want people to read this book. They can order it online, and it's in some of the bookstores in Vermont. Yeah,
you order it wherever you would purchase books. Okay. If it's an independent bookstore, if it's Barnes and Noble, if it's online through Amazon, it's available everywhere.
All right, well, let's get this book selling off the shelves because it's important. Thank you both for being here, and we'll talk again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meyers. We appreciate it. It was lovely getting to know you.
Thank you.